respected Ram Madhavji, Team India Foundation, and all the audience present here. It's a great honor and a delight to speak on a very pertinent topic, the Dalit discourse in modern India. I was told that it is going to be a workshop, so I have not prepared any speech, but I would like to point out certain developments which are happening, certain points regarding Dalit discourse, and how the society and the Dalit discourse is changing. When we talk about the Dalit discourse, we are basically talking about the modern Dalit discourse which emerged during the colonial India. The arrival of the colonial rule was a rupture in the society which fundamentally reshaped the society, and different sections of the society were being pulled into different directions. It is no wonder, and it is something which cannot be denied, that the modern Dalit discourse emerged in those areas which were the first point of contact with the colonial rule and colonial economy. It is Bengal, Madras, Bombay, and Western UP, where you see the rise of the modern Dalit movements and the modern Dalit discourse. And the reason is very simple. These were the areas which came into the contact for the first time with the modern capitalist economy, which was brought to India by the colonial rule. Now, why is that important? You see, capitalism is not just about an economic system, it's also a social phenomenon, it's an entire system in its own. If you look at the Western world, it is the rise of capitalism and the rise of the industrialization and urbanization which destroyed the birth-based order in the Western Europe and much of the Eastern Europe as well. Capitalism and modern economic growth, by the very virtue of creating the free labor or the wage labor, uproots the people from their social parochial identities and social relations and create a new class of people which later on became the basis of new nations. So it's not surprising that the rise of nation and nation states happened in the last 200 years only. Now this process was also brought to India by not by the British. It was not the intention of the British to create a modern capitalist economy in India. It happened as a byproduct of the colonial rule. So we see that the Bombay, the Madras, the Bengal, and the Western UP. Now, Western UP is a very important case because in Western UP, you see for the first time the modern capitalist relations replacing the old Jati Jajmani relations in the agriculture. And it happened in the 1800s. So once you create a free labor, once you create a labor which is not bound by the land, in this case, the Dalit, who even today form the largest agrarian landless laboring caste, you are basically freeing them from the social power of the landholding castes. And caste ultimately is the economic system as well. You know, this entire system of hereditary professions, everyone is interlinked with each other, and a system of graded inequality. Now in Western UP, what happened, Guru Prakash, you might have noticed this thing, you might have read about this thing, that in 1800s itself, the old caste system that you belong to this caste, or you have to go and work in the field of the Jamindar, which comes from a upper Shudra or upper caste category, that started breaking down. And people started getting cash in their hand instead of anaj and other things. I heard lots of people say, "Arey, hamare zamane mein to log aate the, unko hum anaj de dete the, kaam karte the, kitna acha tha." But that's not really a good system because once you get money and cash in your hand, as Hayek would put it, that money is the greatest instrument of freedom ever invented by mankind. Because having money in your hand, having cash in your hand, gives you freedom of choice, freedom of action, and freedom to invest your resources in the areas you want to. And this process accelerated after independence when you have the modern economic growth. So you see the caste system starts breaking down in its traditional sense from the colonial rule. That now you really do not have the economic underpinning of the caste. What you are left with is social underpinning of the caste, which Guru has talked about. So I'm not going into detail in those aspects, which Guru Prakash ji has already talked about. But this was important because this is the emergence of the modern Dalit discourse. Now, once you have cash, you can invest in education. Once you have education, you have resources. You can invest in social movements, political movements, and this is what you see happening from the late 19th century onwards. And why I said Western UP is very important, because Western UP later on becomes the base of the rise of the Bahujan Samaj Party in Uttar Pradesh, the only Dalit party which came to power on its own anywhere in India after independence. The process started in 19th century itself. This is what I was trying to point out. Now, we all know the standard Dalit discourse, which Guruji has also already talked about, that it's about representation, it's about dignity, it's about equality. But certain things are changing in the modern era as well. After independence, what happened? In fact, the process started during the British rule itself. When you have the emergence of the modern economy and the modern industry, who are the people who moved into the modern economy first? Those were the sections of the society who had better education, who had better resources, who had better socioeconomic capital. And those are basically the upper Shudras or the upper caste, as we call them. Now what happened? This process after independence accelerated because Congress came to power and they wanted to create a great socialist utopia. They focused on heavy industrialization. Nehru, for all these big talk, he never ever invested in the basic things like health and education. It was all the focus of on creating big industries, steel industries, and so on. Now the problem it created was very significant. It meant that the certain sections of the old economy, the village economy, who were basically the upper caste or the forward caste, they moved on to the new economy. They moved on to the urban, modern economy, whereas the Dalits especially remained where they are. So now the socioeconomic difference between the forward caste and the Dalits was now overlaid by the difference between an urban economy and a village economy, a modern economic sector, and the traditional economic work. So this gap started widening up after the independence. And it happened, it accelerated because economic growth also accelerated after independence. Because for 200 years of British rule, the per capita income growth of India was almost zero. If I'm not wrong, Harsh Gupta is sitting here. Now that created social antagonism, that started creating problem, and we know it had political, social consequences, rise of radical movements, rise of caste-based parties like in UP, Baspa, Sapa, and so on. They started saying, well, Congress cheating us, our condition is not improving, it is deteriorating under the Congress rule, despite all the promises of independence, we have not got anything. Now that led to a very a significant reshaping of the political culture. The character of the parliaments and legislatures also changed, which Guru has talked about, how after 80s, if you look at the data itself, the composition of the parliament and legislature changes as more and more Dalit caste and the other lower Shudra caste started getting into the parliament. Now what is happening now? This process is accelerating, this is not stopping. And now what is happening because of the advent of the fourth industrial revolution that you have today, there's even a greater challenge because in the 70 years of our independence, we have still failed to invest in health and education. Now, when you talk about that Dalit in the village that Guru is talking about, or the person who has moved perhaps from the village to the, let's say, urban city, found a job in some Ola, Uber, or whatever, that person cannot invest in the skills and the social capital required to move up to face the challenges of the new industrialization, which is the fourth industrial revolution. Now, what is going to happen? Because the fourth industrial revolution, you're going to have fundamental disruptions which have already begun. Already lots of youth sitting here, you would know that the old jobs are disappearing. There's no stability in job because the frequency of tech disruption is increasing. So what you invest in, you have to be investing in education, in skills every few years to remain relevant in the economy. Now that is something which Dalit castes cannot do. A large section of the Dalit caste cannot do because of the things which has happened in the last 70 years. Now that is creating lots of resentment on the ground, and you see that. The rise of more radical politics in the recent years, the rise let's say, the rise of, or the entry of the Naxal group and the Islamist group in the Ambedkarite discourse, which Guru has pointed about. All these things are byproduct of fundamental disruptions which are happening in the economy, which is creating more and more antagonism and resentment because of the inability of the large section of the society to move on to the higher stages of the value chain in the production process. Now that poses the greatest challenge to the entire political process, the social stability as well, because last time it happened, it completely destroyed the Congress party. Now if it happens again, the consequences can be unpredictable. So I think that is where the Dalit discourse should focus upon. Last point, there are some positive aspects as well. It's not that everything is going to be more gloomy and dreadful. There's a rise of the modern Dalit middle class because of, number one, because of the reservation policy, because of the representation which has been given. Number two, because of the same economic growth which has given rise to a small but vibrant section of the entrepreneurs, people, and the business class and the Dalit class. Now, this class has a different idea. It does not talk about dignity, representation that much because they already more or less have it. They are more into, their concerns are more like the other sections of the middle class in the country. So that is a good thing which is happening because there's a convergence of the aspirations and convergence of the worldview of different castes of India. And that is again the byproduct of urbanization, because once you move from your village where there's extreme segregation, where there's extreme discrimination, and sorry to say, lots of people may not disagree, but villages of India are really not a good place to live. And this is why you see India is the country where you have the largest human migration currently undertaking. People are literally running away from the villages to the cities. Despite this pandemic shutdown, lots of people went back to the villages. They're not back to the cities. Now, once you move to an urban center and you're working in a more modern economic sector, modern kind of jobs, modern kind of factory jobs, living in the same colony or maybe colony next to each other, then the old caste segregation simply goes away. It happens over generation, does not happen overnight. But what India is witnessing is the rise of a new class of Hindu castes which share similar aspirations, similar worldview, they share similar concerns. And this class, as many people have pointed about, has become the big votary of Hindutva politics, and that is one of the main reasons of the, the electoral victories of the BJP in the urban centers, because now you have, it's not that you have destroyed the caste politics, it's not that you have superseded it, it's somehow that you have a new constituency which does not relate to caste identity that much, but relates to the more modern middle class sensibilities. That is one thing which has happened positively as the result of the economic transformation. But this discourse is not still dominant enough. In Dalit discourse, you have still the dominance of the old Ambedkarite radical discourse, and you have the emergence of more radical ideologies and concerns because of the disruptions in the economy and society being caused by the technological disruptions as the fourth industrial revolution starts making headway into India. I think we need to talk about these things if we want to understand and reshape the future. Thank you.